Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Path of Exile 2 video. In this one, I'm going to try to do my best in teaching you how to approach deterministic crafting in Path of Exile 2. To do this, I'll be utilizing the website Craftofexile.com, not my website. Big shout out to Nebuchadnezzar, who's actually the creator behind it. And in there, he's recently just updated the emulator. This is a part of the website that allows you to practice crafting without spending your in-game hard-earned currency, and therefore you can follow along what I'm going to teach you in this video step by step, and then you practice doing that in the Craft of Exile website. In my previous two crafting videos, I noticed that I used a lot of slangs and terms for Path of Exile related stuff, such as slamming, recombing, merging together, and all of those things, and I realized that, well, to be fair, I didn't realize. The comment section realized that a lot of people who don't have past Path of Exile experience literally didn't understand a single word of what I said. I'm going to try to amend that by making sure this guide is covering all of the aspects of it to the best of my knowledge and experience. And I will simply just do my best to cover these aspects and make sure that people that are new to the game will understand this crafting video. And I do apologize for this little long intro. Before we dive into the video, there are two things to point out that are very important. Number one, learning how to craft in Path of Exile will open up the whole game to be played in a very different way. Not only will you be able to tell the value of items that you see on the ground based on crafting knowledge, but also be able to upgrade your own items and or craft items for actual increased value of selling them. The other reason, number two, is that you should hit the like button, subscribe for more content. Support the channel, helps us out a ton. Trust me, I appreciate that a lot. So thanks so much for doing that. Let's crack into the video. To understand crafting, one has to understand how affixes work in the game. So we'll start there. With the basics. A magic item can have two affix modifiers. One is a suffix modifier, and the other one is a prefix modifier. A rare item can have up to 6 of these, 3 being suffix and 3 being prefix. That is the default state of item anatomy, if you will. There's a ton of different crafting materials available in the game, ranging from transmutations and augmentations, adding modifiers to white and blue magic rarity items, whilst regal orbs would turn the item rare, just like most essences would do. Once an item is rare, we'll mostly be using exalted orbs or annulment orbs or divine orbs. On top of this, it is also important to point out that we'll be utilizing omens in Path of Exile 2. This is how we basically adjust or alter the way these orbs will work on the item. That is what I'll be covering in this video. I'll also mostly be covering what's referred to as modifier tags. This is crucial when it comes to endgame proper crafting in the game. So to start this off, I'll use an example of how to deterministically craft a +3 or +4 level of minion skill Sceptre. Let's dive into the website Craftofexile.com. So currently in the game, the most attractive type of weapon that you want to use for a minion build is the Rattling Sceptre. So first I will go to Craftofexile.com and click on the top left PoE 2. Now I like to do this on 2 different pages. Then I'll search for a Rattling Sceptre and I'll search for a Rattling Sceptre on the other one. Now I have 2 of these pages up, and this is for future usage of the emulator, so I can always revert back and check tag systems. So first and foremost, we have to decide what modifiers are we looking for. And in this specific example, I'm going to show you the process of guaranteeing a +3 or +4 level of minion skills. This is going to be these modifiers. If you look at the columns here, I can see that the item level required on the item to be able to roll +4 is an item level of 78 or higher. So if I'm going to be doing that, I'll make sure that the item has that item level. The secondary most important stat for minion builds is obviously Spirit, and having an item level 82 can roll tier 1, which is very high. However, we're going to be wanting Spirit, so 78 or higher is the goal for the item level of the Sceptre itself. Now, we're going to first go and look at these modifiers. These are the modifiers I'm going to want to have, so Spirit with minion skills. The third most important stat for minion builds is allies in your presence deal damage. Now we have the 3 top choices of damage or modifiers that I want from the item. I can only guarantee the craft on this specific one. After showing you this, you will understand why, the level of minion gems. However, it also means that we could use the abyssal craft method of desecrating an item, which you can see in the desecrated mods available, but basically these are not going to be possible to utilize in the emulator. So the way the desecration system works is that you can desecrate an item with the abyssal currency. So in this case, for a Sceptre, we would be using a preserved jawbone. There is a higher tier of this. It is not worth using, and the lower one cannot be used on item level at 78 or higher. So we'll be using a preserved jawbone. This desecrates a rare weapon or quiver. And if you hold down Alt and hover over the desecrate, you get this little information window that says desecrating an item adds an unrevealed desecrated modifier. The desecrated modifier can, in some cases, add specific modifiers, such as these are shown in Craftofexile, for example, increase spear reservation efficiency, which is really good. However, it can also roll your generic modifiers, which are shown here in Craftofexile. Knowing this information, we also know that if you click on this to get the menu up, if the modifiers are full on a rare item, that would be having 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes, as mentioned earlier, then a random modifier will also be removed in the process. However, if it is not full, that means if you have, let's say, 3 suffixes and 2 prefixes, doing the desecrated will just guarantee adding a prefix desecrated modifier that you can later unveil or reveal in the Well of Souls. Well of Souls you'll find in the Act 2 zone, which you'll find connected to the Mastodon Badlands over to Lightless Passage, which connects to the Well of Souls if you haven't picked it up already. So that is quite important to point out when it comes to the desecrate system. And when you unveil or reveal this modifier, you will have the 3 different modifiers to choose from. You can, however, utilize what's called an Abyssal Echo, which I'll show you here, right here. An Abyssal Echo looks like this. This is an Omen of Abyssal Echoes. While this is in your item is in your active in your inventory, the next time you will reveal a desecrated modifier, you will be able to re-roll those 3 options to 3 new options. But then you have to pick one of those 3. So knowing that we can kind of chase down one modifier out of these 3 most important stats, that means that when we craft this weapon, we're going to be aiming at getting the crafted process to guarantee the level of minions. We're going to want to start the item off with one of the other 2 modifiers. Should the unveil or reveal system fail, then there is another echo that you can use, or Omen, which is called Omen of Light, which is currently very expensive. This allows us so that when this item is active in your inventory, your next Orb of Annulment will remove only a desecrated modifier. Orb of Annulment looks like this. This is an Orb of Annulment, which removes a random modifier from an item, but thanks to the Omen, we're able to make it deterministically guarantee the type of outcome that the Orb of Annulment will do. So that's how we can play around with desecrated modifiers, which will play a major role in the type of crafting I'm about to show you. And now we know that plus level minions is what we're going for. We do want spirit. We want allies and presses deal increased damage. Any other stats would be cast speed for powered zealots. We want for the cocaine ants, we're going to want the increased attack speed and attack physical damage. There's a lot of beneficial modifiers, but these are the 3 most important ones. So I'm going to show you how to do this. First and foremost, we're going to learn how the tag system works. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to show you that on the spirit, there is no other text around this. Whereas on the allies in your presence deal % extra damage has a red block or black box with a red text saying damage. That is what's called a tag. That is a damage tag, which is very, very important. On the level of minion skills, there's 2 tags. One is a minion tag and the other one is a gem tag. And the reason this is important is because in-game we have available access to what's called a homogenizing exaltation omen. What this one does is that when this is active in your inventory, your next exalted orb, which includes greater and perfect exalted orb, which I'll tackle in a bit, they will be adding a modifier of the same type as an existing modifier on the item. So if I had this homogenizing exalted orb and I exalted orb an item that only had the level of minion gems. Let's say you have a Sceptre and it's rare and it only has level of minion skills. If I were to exalt that item with an homogenizing omen, it will guarantee add me a modifier that has a minion or a gem tag. But if you look at the list, there are no prefixes with these tags. And on the suffix list, that would only be this one. Minion life is increased because that one has a minion tag. Knowing this and understanding the tag system, that means that some specific modifiers are deterministically craftable. So in this specific example, we could start off with a Sceptre that has, for example, the minion life has an increased modifier. If we were to homogenize Exalted Orb, this specific item with only this, the guaranteed outcome would be to either get the level of minions or allies in your presence regenerate life, because this has a life and a minion tag, which means that it will either hit your life mod or your minion tag in this case. Now, since the weighted modifier, the weighted pools is basically the odds of them rolling, is lower than the life regeneration, it's most likely going to add this modifier to your item. However, since a rare item can have 3 modifiers, this means that if your item looks like this, with allies in your presence regenerate life and minions increase life, if you were to homogenize Exalted Orb this, you don't even have to use an omen that would guarantee this to become a suffix, because those things exist as well. They look like this. For example, Sinistral Exaltation will guarantee that the Exalt will only add a prefix modifier. And if you are doing the homogenizing craft with the example I just showed, it will prevent you from using this. However, if you were to use this one, Dextral Exaltation, it will guarantee adding a suffix modifier. We don't need to do that when it comes to this specific craft. So homogenizing Exalted on this specific scenario will guarantee minion skills. Now, I'm going to show you the emulator and show these examples in live action, which you can do with practicing here on the Craftofexile. You can click on the emulator, you can use the calculator setting, which in my case is a Rattling Sceptre, and click Use Calculator, or you can just click in Create Item. So using the calculator, we will now have indeed a crafting product Rattling Sceptre. So let's just make the item rare, and then you can right-click these modifiers to even fracture or even remove if you were to play around with an item you already have. Let's then pretend that we do indeed have an item that has a minion increased life modifier. Then you can click on the Omen section and say, well, we're going to be using the homogenizing exaltation. Since I know that the only 2 outcomes, and this is why I have 2 pages up so I can go between the calculator and the emulator, I know that if I have this modifier, and I do double homogenizing exalteds on this, it would mean that I'm guaranteed to get the regen ally presence and a minion life presence. So if I, in this case, would use homogenizing exaltation omen together with the greater exaltation, which is making the next exalted orb add 2 random modifiers, I am now already guaranteed to get a +3 or +4 level of minion gems. And the way we do that is also, yet again, going back to the calculator. And that is because it is important to point out that when you're looking for this, we have to check the item level. A +3 level of minion skills requires an item level of 55. If I start the greater exaltation with homogenizing exaltation omens on this example, and I then click on the exalted orb, I can choose greater, perfect, or normal. Greater will have a minimum modifier level of 35, whereas perfect cuts it off at level 50. That means that a greater, in this example, will still be able to roll +3. But if I take the perfect, which cuts it at level 50, it will also still be able to roll the +3 level of minions. Therefore, this specific crafting step will not require a perfect exalted orb to guarantee this outcome. I'm going to show this again. We'll use a greater exalted. We can verify that the active omens is a greater exaltation for double modifiers from the next exalts. We have a homogenizing exaltation, which yet again, double checking the tags, will do a life tag as well as a minion tag, and it will add 2 of these modifiers. And the only 2 modifiers with 1 or more of these tags in the entire game for this item is indeed allies regenerate life and +1, 2, 3, 4 for minions. With a greater exalted, that +3 or plus level of minion skills will be 3 or 4. We click it once. I did indeed get the allies regenerate life, and in this case, I got a +3. Now, when it comes to the +3, it is a very simple weight. For those of you who like numbers, I can show you real quick how to calculate this with the weighted pool. +3 has a 250 weight, and +4 has a 100 weight, which means 250 + 100 is 350. That is the total pool of that. And when it rolls this modifier, which means that to hit the +4, you would then take 100 divided by 350. That is 28.51%. That is how you would calculate it if you want to. This is a little bit over the top. For those of you who like that, that's how you do it. So basically, it's a 28% chance that if I do this exaltation in this specific scenario or example, I would get a +3 most of the times, but 28% chance I get a +4. Now, if you want to practice crafting, you can click Ctrl-Z, or you can just click on the undo button and try again. In this case, I got a +4. I can do again, +4, +3, +3, +4, +3, +3, +4. Why didn't I get this lucky when I did this in game? But that's how you do the guaranteed process of crafting this. So how do we then approach this information or utilize this information to get a scepter that doesn't look like ass? Because this does not have spirit, and trying to get spirit as well as nearby allies deal damage in your presence, that's a bit of a too much of a big ask. So what we're going to be doing is going back to the scratch for this craft now that you've shown you guys how this process works. And what we're going to be doing is yet again looking at what are the modifiers we actually care about. We care about spirit, we care about allies in your presence deal damage, and we care about level of minion skills. Before we start choosing how our base item should look when we craft it, we can now verify that if we were to start with the damage modifier, we can then see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 damage prefixes. Okay, we can stay away from that by making sure that our exalted orbs we're doing only touches the suffixes. However, there is one little shitty mod right there called damage and crit tags. This is allies in presence have increased crit strike bonus. This means that to guarantee the level, you cannot start the item with this specific modifier. Whereas spirit, or even the hybrid spirit, despite having mana, does not have any tags. So I'm going to do this in-game as well, just to show you real quick how this would look. I'm looking for an item level of 78 or higher, Rattling Sceptre. I'd like to start with the max life, because if you start with the only region suffix, then it'll be a little bit annoying, because then you have to do double homogenizing slams or exalted orbs, that is. But if you don't start with the life, you have to do it twice, right? So you have to do homogenizing exalt once, and then get that life, and then start from there. I can show you how that process looks so you guys can understand. Let's do it this way. As you can see, it's very easy to just navigate this and do some practice. So we say we have this modifier, which is region. If I were to start the omens and do homogenizing and greater exaltation for double mods, and I try to do a greater, the game will not prevent me from doing this, because it will try to add 2 modifiers that is only life tagged. There is only 1 modifier that is life tagged. So if I try this, Craftofexile will prevent you from doing this. So instead, you will then have to go to your omens and turn off this specific one and do this exalt slam once. I'll get life in this case, which is the highest probability, but now I have to go back to omens and buy another homogenizing exaltation, which at the time of the recording is 155x, so it's not very cheap. But that is the process you would have to do, and then you get your +3 or +4 level of minions, as you can see here. Oh my god, I got so unlucky today on stream. Anyways, so that is why we don't start with this modifier, and we'd rather start with minion life. So if I were to buy a base item to show this craft, I would indeed want to get myself a min increased life. So when you are recombinating, which I will show you in game and all the steps around that, recombinating is basically you smacking 2 different items together, and I'll show you the process in game to make sure no one misunderstands me here. It is easier to do that with a worse tier of modifiers. It increases the % chance of succeeding. So what we're going to be doing is getting 2 Rattling Scepters. So whichever base is chosen, we're going to be on the right side. So first and foremost, I am looking for, honestly, a bad life mod. So I don't want this to go above 30%. We don't really care too much about how the outcome here. We also don't want the item to be corrupted, so we take that away. And then we're looking at this. Here's a tier 5, 1 exalted. I think this is a brilliant opportunity for me to snipe this. Apparently I can't because I'm in D&D. All right, I'm just going to buy this because I'm too lazy. So we'll do 5 exalt straight. Thank God for asynchronous trading. I can hold down Alt and verify that this indeed has a tier 5. It says T5 at the end. Minion life, 29% tier 5. I'll buy this. My next purchase will be to do the same thing, but in this case, I would like a high % of spirit. I'll search for 50. Sometimes in the trade window, because you can see here, it says 58, but it says 2 different numbers here, P7 plus P4. That means that that is a prefix with a tier 7 and a pure prefix with a tier 4, and that's not going to be good. What I'm looking for, if I'm hovering over it, I would like personally the % spirit to be at least above 50, which would be a prefix tier 3 preferably. For example, this one here would work perfectly well for me. And it's only 2 chaos orbs. Let's buy this one. Double check the spirit is indeed not a hybrid roll. 2 chaos, I'll buy that. The next process you want to do when it comes to recombinating items is very straightforward and very simple. What you're looking to do is basically make sure at the trade here to purchase an omen of recombination. What this does is that it makes the recombination process lucky. What lucky means, I'll explain in a moment. So first off, you choose one. You can do this and just take all of the items here, but it's a 1.41% chance that that will succeed. So let's not do that. On the left hand, we have the one with a life modifier. I'll take that one. On the right hand, we have the spirit. If I choose this because it's a bad tier, with this one, which is a good tier, I still end up with over 50% chance to succeed, and it's going to cost me 26 broken circle artifacts. Now, with this information, we can then use the Omen of Recombination, and this roll will basically roll the 57% chance, and then there's a, in this case, it's about 50-50, which base is going to choose, which for us doesn't matter, but it's a 57% chance of succeeding. If I'm using a Recombinator of Lucky, it's going to roll this twice, and the better result is used. So basically, it's checked to 57%, and then it checks to 57% again. Is any of those checks being successful? It will be successful. So that's how you combine these two items, which will turn into a rare item with both of these modifiers. Now we have a base with the increased life and the spirit that we can work with to guarantee the plus level of minions. So this is the process I would go through to get my entire base sorted that I'll be working on. This is a specific example for the Rattling Sceptre that I'm doing. There are plenty of ways to do this, but this is how I would do it. Showing this specific item in Craftofexile's emulator, I can now set the Rattling Sceptre up to have indeed spirit with the max life. And we can go through the entire process we just shown you by clicking the Omen, homogenizing exaltation to make sure that it follows the tag system, greater exaltation for double modifiers for my next exalt slam. And because of the fact that the spirit, which we can verify right here, does not have a tag, this will guarantee +3 or +4. And we talked about it earlier. We are going to use a greater exalted. Click this once, and that's how you get a spirit guaranteed item with +3 level of minions. And the next process I would go through here would be to desecrate the modifier and hopefully get a veil modifier with the level of or increased damage for nearby allies. Now, I do happen to have some currency in game, so I will quickly show this in action live. So first and foremost, I'm going to want a exaltation, which makes my exalted orb add 2 modifiers. I will make sure that I pick up a homogenizing omen like this. Ooh, that's expensive now. And then I will make sure that these two are active by right-clicking them. I'll verify the item that it indeed has the minion life and it has the spirit. I also do have double mods now. I do also can guarantee here that I have a homogenizing exaltation. I'll smack the greater. I will get nearby allies regenerate life, and I will get level 3 or level 4 level of minions. In this case, I indeed got +3 level of minion skills, which is the highest probability in this case. Now my suffix modifiers are full. Next process would be to indeed use the desecration system. In this case, how you finish it is up to you, but the most important step would be to indeed use the preserve jawbone. And since the item is not full of modifiers, I can do this without risking to remove anything, and that gives me that veiled modifier. In this specific process, I will now unveil this, but before this, I like to do 2 personal things. First and foremost, I like to get myself an Omen of Abyssal Echo so that I can get another shot at it in case the mods are bad. And I don't mind using a Greater Exalted Orb to fill out the last mod, because if I get a Hybrid Spirit or if I get the nearby allies deal increased damage, a Greater Exalted gives me good enough of a tier for me to be happy with it. So I'll do this. I ended up getting flat mana, and now I'm crying, even though you guys can't see my camera right now. Then we're going to go to the Well of Souls. Make sure that your Omen of Abyssal Echo is indeed active in your inventory, otherwise it doesn't work before you unveil it. Click the Well of Souls, shove the item in, reveal the item, and in here, you can see, oh god, you can see that we got allies in presence deal 28% increased damage, which is rather bad. I'm going to take the roll of the dice here and just re-roll it, and we got completely fucked over. I will just take the spirit in this case, and there's your finished item. Now, this is obviously a +3, and it's not really worth that much, but that is the crafting process for this specific example. This is the process of how you can utilize the tag system on Craftofexile to understand of how you can deterministically craft items and take it step by step from there to move on, and utilize the Recombinator to guarantee the specific type of base you're looking for, and that's how I'm crafting the +3 and +4 scepters. Obviously, this can be applied in many other ways that is not specific to minions. So the other example I'm going to show you later in this video is going to be covering a pair of energy shield gloves of how you can guarantee high energy shield with resistances or even attributes gloves. And I'll show you that in a bit, so stay tuned. As the Sceptre example here is showing, it can get rather confusing and somewhat complex. But once you fully understand the tag system and the different currency orbs together with what the omens are doing to basically alter those things, this crafting method becomes very, very easy to understand. And you can apply this crafting method on basically every item in the entire game. Understanding these methods and learning how to craft with the current state of the game's crafting methods will make it so much easier to understand crafting when PoE releases new leagues, introducing the inevitable new crafting methods. So if you learn the basics now, then adding those things on top of that becomes extremely easy. On top of that, the sooner you learn these things, the better you'll be at it, and the sooner you'll have more fun with the game, as once you learn how to craft in Path of Exile, both 1 and 2, it opens up this whole wide range of different ways to play in the game. Instead of just showing you one example, I'm going to dive in and show you another example, in this case being an energy shield pair of gloves, which is more generic and the same crafting methods there can be applied on basically any type of defensive gear, your helmet, your body armor, your boots, your gloves, you name it. So let me show you a pair of energy shield gloves. Just like the previous example, I'm first going to search for a pair of energy shield gloves, which are intelligence based. And in my personal case, I do like having 2 of these up, so I'll search it on 2 different tabs here. One is for me to check the calculator, in which I can see that on the prefixes, we have energy shield, we have energy shield hybrid with life, we have some accuracy, energy shield with flat energy shield, flat life, flat mana, some attack modifiers here, which are elemental tag, very important to keep that in mind, as well as physical damage. On the suffixes, there are some other modifiers we haven't seen yet, which is attack speed, we get crit damage bonus. There are some defensive tags here as well, which is very, very important to point out when it comes to crafting this type of approach. We also have some attributes if you want to go for that, and a few other modifiers. So that is how this calculator will look. In the emulator, I'm going to use the calculator setting in here and just take a Siren scale because they're the best base, and we have this prepped. And what we're going to be doing now is deciding which modifiers do we want on this item and then apply the methods of crafting onto this. Now, for an energy shield pair of glove, you have 2 different versions. You have a pure energy shield going for as much ES as possible, ES being energy shield. The other approach is something, the build that I like to run or have been running mostly during this league, which is an Infernalist, in which case I would prefer to see some life modifiers. Now, I already spotted on the suffixes that there are life tagged modifiers as suffixes. The other problem we have is if I want to have triple resistance suffixes on these gloves, it also means that if I get chaos resistance, for example, I'm kind of fine on that. But if I have any of the elemental ones, these 3 different modifiers can now roll. This means that I'm kind of limited in my options when it comes to guaranteeing 6 specific modifiers that I'm looking for. And we also always have the option of using the desecrated modifiers as we talked about in the Sceptre. But in this case, we would use the preserved rib to apply to rare armor. The gloves I'm currently wearing in game is actually a triple resistance pair of gloves with triple resistance or triple energy shield, also referred to as ES pair of gloves. However, I will point out that this craft is not 100% deterministic, but I can show you how to craft the gloves that I'm wearing and then show you the deterministic approach of doing that the best we can. There is always a risk that in the end, my prefixes might not end up with the stats that we want. So first and foremost, we have to decide now what stats do we want. If I'm going for a life-based, in my case, I hit a hybrid life and I have an energy shield there, which I'm supposed to reroll to life. I've just been too lazy. The mods we would want would look like this. We want percent energy shield, we want flat energy shield, and we want a high life. Or we could take the hybrid energy shield life. That works fine. So these are basically the mods we would want, where the life or the hybrid life, either of them would work fine for the Infernalist. So those are the 4 mods, whereas percent energy shield and flat energy shield are the most important stats. If I'm looking at suffixes, we have 2 different options. We can do perhaps dexterity, intelligence. We could then have a 3rd modifier become a resistances. We could desecrate it, or we could just do triple res. So in my case, I believe that I would like some chaos res in this example. And let's just say that we want 2 more resistance modifiers. Which of them we get, we'll see. So now that we've decided which modifiers we're actually going for, we'll then have to decide which starting base are we going with. So with this information, it looks like chaos resistances seems to be the best course of action for me to start with on these pair of gloves. And we can have that be a version for this to allow us to basically have a resistance tag already on the item, which allows us to roll the homogenizing exaltation omen for the cold, fire, or lightning resistance. And it won't affect anything else on suffixes, and there is no chaos on the prefix, nor are there any resistance mods. However, for the prefix modifiers to finish, we do want some defense modifiers, and there is a defense modifier being energy shield recharge rate as a suffix. So because of this, I would like to avoid that. And to avoid this, we're going to make sure that our orbs only target specific type of modifiers. I also believe it would be easier to hit the energy shield modifiers or the hybrid energy shield mod than it is to hit the life. But since we are okay with hitting the hybrid energy shield life instead of the life mod, I think this is going to be perfectly fine to do. There's a couple of ways of doing this, but the starter item for this, I would recommend having either getting a pair of blue gloves with energy shield on the market, and then using something like a Chaos Essence. The Chaos Essence would look like something like this. A Greater Essence of Ruin can be used in armor, belt, or jewelries, and that would give 16 to 19% Chaos Rest. It's not a great tier, but it is still a bit of Chaos Rest. I believe that is what I have right here, actually. That is 16 to 19%. That is exactly what I have, and we're not too scared on the Chaos Rest of this character right now. So that's kind of how I would like to approach it. And that would look like this. I would try to find something like, say, a tier 1 energy shield modifier, or even if you don't have access to this, you could, and I'll show you that in a bit as well. You could have something like this and then use a Greater Essence, and it was of Ruin, and click on this, which will turn the item rare. And then now I have an energy shield base with Chaos Resistance as something to start with. Now, I do believe that specifically for Science Scale gloves, this would be extremely expensive to pick up. What you could do is have an item that looks like this, and then like with just a random modifier, we can do this and just say, oh, I had a really bad mod like this, and then just annul it. Because in PoE 2, you can have a blue item with literally 0 modifiers, and it will maintain its rarity. This would allow me to then put the Greater Essence of Ruin, which will now turn it into a pair of gloves that I want with the actual Chaos Resistance and nothing else. So this is the method that I will be showing this specific craft example on. I'm not saying that this is the best way to do it, but it will allow me to show you a few other ways to play when it comes to the crafting methods. So hear me out. We have now bought a magical based item. It looks like something like this. It has a terrible modifier that we want nothing to do with. Because it is magic, we are able to use an essence modifier, which will then turn it rare to further allow us to play with other modifiers. That is one way of approaching it. Another way of approaching it is actually using homogenizing coronation. So I just would like to show you a quick example. I'm not going to fully craft this process, but I will show you the example of this because the homogenizing coronation does exactly what the Exalt is doing, except it is for a Regal Orb. So if I have a tier 1 energy shield in this example, actually, because there's a defense mod, we shouldn't do it with that one. If we have something like a Chaos, if I can spell properly, a Chaos resistant roll to start with. Let's say we have a tier 2 Chaos Res in this example. Instead of using an Essence, we could use a homogenizing coronation Regal Orb, which luckily, unless it's changed, is hilariously cheap to buy compared to the Exaltation version. 8 Exalteds versus 143 in the current market at the time of this recording. So we could do this, and then we could make sure that the Regal, in this case, if I can find it, this one will only add a suffix. However, going back to the calculator, we can now see that Chaos Resistance is tagged with Chaos Unrest. There are no prefixes with these tags, which means I don't need to use this. All I have to do is a homogenizing coronation and then use a Regal Orb. And now we have to check the item level restrictions on these things compared to the calculator. So in this example, we have a Chaos Resistance roll. If I do the Regal for a resistance, I'm guaranteed to get a second resistance modifier. And I don't think there is any double Regals here. So in this example, we can then check the Chaos and Resistance. We're going to give us Chaos and Resistance tags. There is none, which means that I'll be getting Cold, Fire, or Lightning Rest by doing this Regal. The item level in this example, 82 for tier 1. And if I use a Greater, it will block the minimum modifiers at 35, so 34 and lower can't roll, which means that tier 876 can't roll in this example on these resistance rolls. If I use a perfect, it goes to 50, which means that we can then hit tier 4 or higher. And since perfect regals are very cheap, that's what we're going to start with. I do this and I get a tier 2 resistance roll. Now we've guaranteed a tier 4, 3, 2, or 1 resistance roll with this process. I'd like to fill my last suffix in this example, which would mean that I would then have to go with an omen and use it homogenizing exaltation, just like we've done with the Sceptre. I would then not really care about anything else, because in this case, if we look at this, we have a fire res. Always verify the calculator. And then I'll see fire resistance. Now I would just slam this if I didn't think 2 steps further. That's a fire tag. But then look to the left on the prefix list, I can see that there's a fire prefix. This means that not only do I need to use an homogenizing exaltation omen, I want to make sure that I get a suffix. Otherwise, I might hit a fire damage attack prefix. At this point, I will then use textual exaltation, which will guarantee my exalted orb to only add a suffix modifier. Since it is now unable to add a prefix, I am safe from adding a bad mod I don't want. And then we'll go to exalted orbs, and in this example, I'm going to use perfect exalters to show you the tippity top of it, but you don't have to go crazy and spend tons of currency. However, the homogenizing exaltation omens are pretty expensive, so I will be using the bigger crafts for this. So we'll put a perfect exalted, and now I'm going to get cold or lightning resistance out of this, which is a tier 4, 3, 2, 1 or higher. In this case, we got a tier 1 lightning res. Now my suffixes are complete. Then now we're going to be working on the prefixes. And the reason I wanted to show this craft in this specific way is because we don't have a defense tagged item. We have fire, lightning, and chaos. Fire, lightning is going to give us a slight probability. These have very low weight, so there's low chance that they roll this, but they still have the risk of rolling. This is why this is not entirely deterministic, because of these on gloves specifically. But again, we have fire, we have lightning. That means this modifier and this modifier can roll, and we don't want that. So what do? First and foremost, we need to make sure that there is a modifier on the item that has a defense tag to guarantee these outcomes that we do want. We do this by using Desecrate. So essentially, you'll put a preserved rib on the item, which will put a veil modifier. You get 1 out of 3 different options to pick from. You can then combine this with a Omen of Abyssal Echoes, exactly like I showed you with the Sceptre, to re-roll those options and allow you to have 2 chances with 3 modifiers in each chance to get any defense tagged modifier. Now we go back to the calculator and we can see that the modifiers we can get is Energy Shield and Life, and Energy Shield, which is flat. Now if we get any of these modifiers, that is perfectly fine. You can keep any of them. If you happen to hit a flat life, it is not entirely terrible, but you're going to guarantee this outcome, which we'd rather avoid. So what you want to do, preferably, would be to chase down the Energy Shield Life modifier. And if we can't add this in the emulator, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just add a lower tier, and I'm going to show it up as a fracture, but just to give you an idea. So let's pretend that this is now a green tagged mod, and that is your desecrated modifier that you chase down. And when I say chase down, I mean you use the Abyssal Echoes. Should it fail and you didn't find any, the play would then be to use Omen of Light to annul that. Holy shit, they're expensive. I'm going to talk about the process of this. You don't have to use all of these methods, but I'm going to teach them to you no matter the insane prices right now. So this is the process to get this modifier to get the biggest tippity-top version of these gloves. Once you have this, you now have 2 prefix slots open. Because we have 2 prefix slot modifiers open, we can go to Omen, Homogenizing Exaltation, Greater Exaltation, because this is a life and defense tag, which allows us to get percent and flat energy shield as well as flat HP, which we are fine with in this example. And I don't need to do anything else except going to Exalted Orbs and using a Perfect X, and then we're going to slam this. And if we hit the life one, it's going to be a tier 2 or tier 1 flat HP. And if we hit the energy shield ones, we're going to get the percent and energy shield. No matter what we do, we're going to get 2 of these 3 modifiers. So I'll try this out. And there we see the negative impact of having a fire resistance or lightning resistance on the gloves. There's a low probability that this happens, And it did. And it's not the greatest feeling, I'll tell you that. But this can happen because of these specific gloves don't have 100% deterministic approach to it. So this happened because of the fire rest tag, adding this to the item. However, we did hit a tier 2 life. So if this happens, you have a couple of options. You can either get yourself an omen of Sinistral Annulment, which costs quite a lot of currency, I will admit. And this allows you to annul a prefix modifier and pray you remove the fire damage. This is something you would do if you're chasing that tippity-top perfect item approach. And if you don't look for this, then skip this, keep what you get. And then essentially what I would refer to is re-rolling your Desecrate modifier by using an Omen of Light, reapply a new Desecrate modifier, and then use your Abyssal Echo to roll that twice. And then if that doesn't work out, Omen of Light again. That's what I'm talking about when I say chase down a Desecrate modifier. So I'm going to show you this craft a couple of times. So we're going to slam this one more time with this process. And you can see here, we got a flat energy shield. We got a percent energy shield. If this were to happen, you would just re-roll your Desecrate mod and keep the life if you hit one alive, or you keep the hybrid life and energy shield if you get that. And then you'd basically are home free. And it would look like something like this with almost 300 energy shield. So that's an example. Something else we can do is doing another slam. In this one, this is the worst outcome. And this is because we have the fire lightning resistance. Very low probability that this will happen. But we get double attack modifiers. I don't even think that someone would buy this. If this were to happen, you would again be incentivized to just basically removing your prefixes with the Sinistral Annulment. And this part can be very expensive if you're unlucky. So we can go back to Undoing and Exalted, show again. We got a tier 2 life with lightning attacks. I will redo, go again. We have, Jesus Christ, fire and energy shield, and then we can do it again. But now we have a tier 1 life with a tier 1 flat energy shield. In this case, I would re-roll the Desecrated modifier into a percent energy shield as an example. Now, I wonder if I can click on these steps. I cannot start. Okay. So we're going to go back to this state of the item. And I'm going to show you the process of doing this yet again, but in this case, we're starting with the prefixes. So in this case, you could use an essence to get the chaos resistance with a good energy shield mod on the item already. And that's just an essence of ruin. So now we have an energy shield that we want to keep, and we have a chaos resistance on this example. Then we can go back to Craftofixile's calculator and see that the defense tag can give us increased energy shield recharge rate, which is not necessarily bad. It is not a terrible thing to get. However, what we can do in this example is using, again, omens, homogenizing exaltation, greater exaltation for 2 modifiers, and then use sinistral exaltation, which means that now I will guarantee that my next slam is going to give me prefixes, which means I cannot roll this defensive modifier for this slam. And the greater exaltation will allow me to add 2 modifiers. So we'll do this with a perfect exalted. We have percent energy shield. We're going to add 2 modifiers. The only 2 prefixes will be hybrid life energy shield and flat energy shield. I do this. And now we have a triple energy shield prefixed pair of gloves. They're guaranteed to be this. It's not something you get for the life-based version, but it is the best version for pure energy shield. And I have a chaos rest in the background if I now choose to want to go for that. This removes the risks of getting these attack modifiers, but it is causing issues for our suffixes. We have 2 choices. We could add an attribute modifier through our Desecrate mod, through just desecrating the item to perhaps get dexterity, which would open up the possibility for us to get intelligence. I don't think that's worth the money because it's just not worth it. The other process we could do is literally do a single slam, because it's usually better, in my opinion, to have the last modifier be filled with your desecrated mod. So in this example, I would literally just do a homogenizing exaltation, and then I would just slam it. What then happens in this example is, because of the life modifier, we're going to have life, defense, chaos, resistance. This means, in this example, we could roll life on enemy killed, life per enemy hit with attacks, leeching physical damage is life. All of these are just there because of the life modifier from the hybrid roll. We can also roll all 3 resistance modifiers, and we can roll the energy shield recharge rates. So I'm going to show you this with an homogenizing salt. In this case, we got lightning res, fire res, cold res. Now we suddenly got the modifier that is completely irrelevant. Now we got fire res. Now we got lightning res. Now we got cold res. So it's pretty good odds. However, the odds are better in your favor to do the energy shield last in this specific craft example, but I wanted to show this as another way of crafting and utilizing the omens in the for the purpose of crafting energy shield gloves, specifically because of how popular energy shield is in the current state of the game. I hope these two examples have at least helped you somewhat in the process of the journey you're on to learn how to craft in Path of Exile 2. Obviously, a big shout out to Nebuchadnezzar, who's the mastermind behind the website craftofexile.com, in which you can just practice crafting before you spend your hard-earned currency in game. Just try to play around with it, use the emulator, check the calculator, and reference this video if you need to go back and rewind and check what I've done to learn the processes. Once you get the hang of it, it's going to go real smooth for you. If you ever run into any issues or find yourself in a spot where you don't really know what to do, you can always leave a comment down below. Myself and many others in our community will surely be able to help you out. You can always swing by my stream. And don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more content. It'll help out the channel quite a lot. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Happy hunting. Stay safe. Keep rocking. Why did I say happy hunting? It's not even my slogan.